You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Well, welcome back, BOOKSTORM listeners, and you are going to be very happy because we've been listening to you. And we have the extremely talented John Searles with us today. He is fresh here from NBC's Today Show, CBS This Morning, Live with Regis and Kelly, NPR's Fresh Air with Terry Gross, CNN, and now with us at BOOKSTORM Podcast, and we could not be more thrilled. John, welcome. So happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I want to tell all of our listeners a little bit about you because we all love your novels. We're here to talk to John about his latest huge success, Her Last Affair, a book Kristen and I adore. But he has a lot of success, John Searles. His writing has been hailed as riveting by the New York Times, hypnotic by Entertainment Weekly. Time magazine named him the person to watch. The New York Daily News calls him a New Yorker to watch. His writing has been praised as sinister and complex by the New York Times, extraordinary by Publishers Weekly, and he was named Best Novel of the Year by Salon. He's been awarded so many prestigious accolades. For example, Boston Globe, Best Crime Novel of the Year. Entertainment Weekly, Top 10. His book, Strange But True, has been adapted for film by the producers of La La Land, released in theaters nationwide by Lionsgate. Amazing and well-deserved. It's now streaming on HBO Max, Amazon Prime, and I just have to say, because I'm so impressed by this, the film stars the award-winning ensemble Amy Ryan, Greg Kinnear, Brian Cox, Blythe Danner, Nick Robinson, and Margaret Qualley. What a cast. Spectacular. The movie has been praised as suspenseful and haunting by The Hollywood Reporter, a twisty tale of tragic secrets by the LA Times, and listeners, you are going to want to watch that film as well. So John has been for 23 years, here's a little backstory, he's been a book editor for Cosmopolitan. He also served as the magazine's brand director, executive director, and editor at large. He lives in New York City. We're so thrilled to have him. John, thank you for being our guest here.
Wow, what a lead up. Can you call my mom and read that to her?
I would be
she would
delighted.
just tell you. She'd just say, yeah, he
her.
talks too much. But thank you. It's an honor. It's a real honor to be here. And thank you for saying such nice things. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. Well, John, we'd like to give our listeners a little bit of kind of a description of the story. So if you'll indulge me, I'll just talk a little bit about it without giving away any spoilers. And I would love for you to add anything or correct anything if you feel you want to do so.
Okay.
Now,
I'm curious because it's a hard book to describe. I'm excited to hear you describe it.
Absolutely. Well, Her Last Affair explores the fates of three apparently unconnected individuals in this wonderful psychological thriller. Retired nurse Skyla Hall lives alone in the shadow of a defunct drive-in movie theater that she and her husband ran for nearly 50 years. Her husband had died in a freak incident about a year before, and she has spent her nights kind of ruminating on some of the difficulties in their marriage that have become more and more apparent to her. Now, as she is struggling with a sight impairment, she ends up taking on a renter And it's a British man, Teddy Cornwell, and he's very charming. Now, 1,000 miles away in Florida, we have unhappily married empty nester Linnell. She feels a little bit at loose ends after losing her job, and her former flame, Teddy, reconnects with her via social media. She decides to head north for a surprise visit. What could go wrong? We have another character that we follow, and that is Jeremy. Now, Jeremy is a freelance writer and a failed novelist, and he decides to look up Mary Ann, a woman that he had somewhat of a crush on 20 years earlier. Now, the lives of these hurting people come together in very deadly and surprising ways. And I'll tell you, this book reveals something about each of us, maybe some of the ugliest things about our nature, but also keeps us on the edge of our seat. It is a thrill ride. So, do you want to add anything?
That was so well said. I have nothing to add. Thank you so much. It
Okay.
was such a perfect description because it is these seemingly disconnected characters. So it's very, we had a hard time at HarperCollins, my editor and I, trying to figure out exactly how to sum it up on the book jacket. So where were you when we needed you? Because you did such a good job.
Call her next time. She's more than
Yeah.
happy to help.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Seriously,
Of
thank
course. Well, if we're ready, we can brave the storm, and Chris will kick us off.
We are ready. And listeners, as you know, we all love John Searles, and his writing is amazing. And this book is no exception. I loved this book. It is filled with dry humor, blatant candor, wit, and we all often think these things secretly in our minds. It's filled with such wit that things that we see and think about people, but we seldom have the courage to say. I laughed right out loud sometimes. Sometimes it hit me so strongly. Sometimes I even felt a little uncomfortable. It evoked these great emotions. I love the quotes. There's a drive-in movie theater in this book, and one of the characters quotes through the theater things that were happening during the movies. And it just struck me that this book, movies are so filled with fantasy. We love to watch these love story films. We love to listen to romantic music. We want to believe that all romantic relationships are perfect and beautiful and going to be exactly as we always fantasized. But this story shows us that's not always true. The character Linnell says, I guess it's interesting to see how love can make some people lose their minds. The book says Freud believed falling in love always verges on the abnormal, by a compulsiveness, by a blindness to reality. It's just not rational. I thought, Linnell, there's some wisdom in there. In this regard, I just am longing to know, you as the writer, what do you believe? And what do you think these characters learned? Is love always good for us? Is sometimes love irrational? Is it better for us sometimes just to run away from love?
Those are some big questions. Yeah, I remember putting those quotes in the book where she talks about what Freud said about love and what others said about love, because in this case, each of these three seemingly disconnected characters, Skyla, Linnell, Jeremy, they're all grappling with some issue having to do with love and having to do with love in their past. In the case of Linnell and the case of Jeremy, they literally reconnect with their very first loves, and that sends them on this dark and twisted journey. And then Skyla is grappling with the death of her husband a few nights before their 50th wedding anniversary, and she reconnects with a person from her deceased husband's past. And so I wanted to kind of plant those quotes in there. Thank you for calling them out. You're a very astute reader, to kind of signal to the book's readers that this is going to be sort of a harsh look at love, or maybe like a noirish look at love, as opposed to, I love a good Nancy Meyers movie. I love her. She does like something's got to give, and it's complicated. I love those movies. This is not that. This is not that kind of movie. And so, really, in terms of my own personal beliefs, I think a lot of times in my own life, I mistook what I thought was love for something else that was really a negative experience. But early on, I was kind of learning. I didn't always have the greatest examples. My mom and dad loved each other, very, very much, but they married extremely young. They were 16 and 17. And my dad was a cross-country truck driver, so he was never home. He's a good-looking guy and had many lady friends out on the road. And I spent a lot of my childhood driving around with my mom. She would send me into bars to get my dad, or send me into his girlfriend's house to get my dad. So I didn't always have the best examples of love. So early on, when I was coming of age, I think I mistook certain relationships to be love that weren't. And then thankfully, I met my husband 26 years ago, and we have a very great, solid, loving relationship. But I don't know, I just wanted to look at all aspects of love. And I don't know, I hope I did that in this book.
You did. And you did something beautiful here because you made it real. So as you said, we all love to watch a little fantastic, cute little love story. It's purely entertaining, but it doesn't leave us with feeling that uh, we changed, opening our minds, helping us to maybe understand what we had gone through. Because everybody has heartache. We all have heartache.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of failed relationships are because we think they're supposed to be perfect. There's nothing absolutely perfect. We don't want abusive situations, but your characters and the way they went after their prior love because they were still hoping that was maybe going to be the perfect one. And I
Yeah.
just love how you wove that together. It's an important story.
You know what I thought was interesting, Chris, is that at the start of the pandemic, when I was really kind of in the midst of writing this book and revising this book, so many people were reconnecting with people from their past, because you remember when the pandemic happened. And I thought, wow, what an interesting thing that during such a dark and scary time in our lives, we all reach out to. It wasn't always a love relationship, but old friends, old family members we haven't spoken to, and a lot of times old boyfriends and girlfriends. And so I think that made such an impression on me, because I thought, isn't it interesting that that's our instinct? It's kind of a comfort. And I think a lot of people, I was kind of questioning in this book, like these people who once had such a place in our lives, in our souls, our hearts, our minds, but no longer do. And so, what would happen if you reached into that past and brought it into the present? And in this case, it's not always so good. But
No,
ultimately at the last minute, there is a last minute twist in the book that one of the situations ends up being very hopeful.
oh, there
Yeah.
sure is. We can't,
Mhm. Yeah.
we always wish we could talk about all of it, but we can't give
Yeah,
anything
of
away. And
course, of course.
this is a book you're going to enjoy till the very last page.
Yeah. And I'd like to dive in a little deeper on this idea of the past. Your characters lived adult lives that were really filled with desperation, with resentment, and regret. And each of them had experienced some type of past trauma, often inflicted by their parents, that really profoundly affected them. And in fact, it later expressed itself in some negative ways: personality disorders, maybe a bent towards violence, but some kind of psychological, maladjustment. I was wondering how you think we should view those with deep psychological wounds, especially when they later harm others. Does empathy play a role? What do you think?
Uh, well, I think so. Often you go see like a superhero movie and the villain is just a purely villainous, and I'm not writing that kind of book. And so all of my characters, I was trying to find the humanity in each of them. And it's funny, I didn't really, one character in particular who I think you're talking about, I didn't really think of him. I didn't like identify him on a psychological scale. I just really explored his character, his troubled relationship with his mother, his past, his issue with his looks. He's so self-conscious about his looks, the harm of people. He overheard something in the past someone said about him that was so damaging. And so I was just kind of writing it, but not really thinking of, oh, what would a psychiatrist diagnose, how would he be diagnosed? I just was writing him from a place of character. So I guess I was having sympathy for him, and I do have sympathy for that character. And obviously then his actions, well, are a different story. I don't condone or forgive them, but I guess I was just trying to show how it unfolded, rather than just creating a two-dimensional villain, without a reasoning behind it. He does overhear something really, really harsh that someone says, some the person he loves most says about him. And people ask me, has that ever happened to me? And when I was growing up, being a gay man, like I didn't even know I was gay when I was a teenager, but somehow the other boys knew, people in my school knew. And so people were constantly saying vicious things about me within earshot. And so I did have that experience all the time. But then I tell a funny story that well, I have two funny stories. But one is we had a couple for dinner once in New York. It was a snowy winter night. We had a fire in our fireplace. And as they were leaving, one forgot their sweater. And I said to Thomas, my husband, oh, I'll run it down the stairwell. The couple was in the elevator. And I grabbed the sweater, run down the stairs. And just as I'm rounding the last staircase into the lobby, I hear them get off the elevator and they say, ah, they serve such heavy food. And John eats so fast. John eats so fast. So I came back upstairs with the sweater, and Thomas said, what happened? Why didn't you give Matthew a sweater? I said, they were talking about him. And so it's actually a much less damaging story, and I found it really funny than what this character goes through. But this character, it is, I think we've all had times like that where you've overheard some things that someone says about you. And in this case, it was not heartbreaking, but in the case of this book, it's quite heartbreaking for this character. So it's just trying to draw a human portrait of this person. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and when I was reading your book, I kept thinking about many of some of the horrific crimes that we're seeing in the news involve people who are very damaged. I mean, they have had an upbringing where they heard things that were negative, that they were wounded by somebody. And it was very tough for me to try to show empathy because they inflicted great harm on others later. And so that's what your book really made me think about for the past several weeks. I've been talking to Chris about this. I think I'm driving her nuts
Huh.
because should empathy play a role in sentencing? How do we help people who have these deep wounds and are not, living lives that are respectful of others? I mean, this is something really big that you were broaching in your book that we don't often see.
Yeah. I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't know. I think I explored these issues in my writing, and then I leave people hopefully to examine it and take what they believe from it. And it makes me happy to hear that you found it thought provoking, and um that it brought on all this, because it is things I was thinking about when I wrote it. Like I said, I was trying to just draw a really human portrait of this character, but you're right, it gets very nefarious, especially in the last third of the book. Before you said you call the book a thriller, which I'm honored and flattered to be in that category. My publisher describes them as thrillers. I actually don't think of myself as a thriller writer. I actually Googled today, what is a thriller? Because uh, I just think of myself as a storyteller, and but my books start with characters, and then as they go on, they become more thrillerish, especially in the second half of the book. And so I think sometimes people come to my books and they expect it to open with like a woman being chased through the woods, or whatever the usual kind of thriller openings are. And mine really start, like you said, the first sentence is every marriage has its secrets, and it's really starts to lay out these characters that seem separate, and then halfway through their worlds collide, and that's when it ratchets up into a novel of suspense. Anyway.
Yeah, I love it. And we talked about this before we went on the air live, but I love your writing because it's very authentic. You have a very natural, truthful voice. It's a very strong voice. And
Thank you.
I can see that you're speaking. You can't help as a writer not to speak from past experience. It's who we are, it's who you are. We're a compilation of a lot of things that have been done to us and words spoken to us. And we can overcome a lot of them. But it's probably also therapeutic to put it in here. And you don't have to give us answers. You're giving scenarios that make every reader step back and say, wow, wow, I can relate to that. Listen, me personally in real world, I had a tough childhood too. I had some bullying and things go on. I think almost all of us have gone through some tough things in life, but here we are today coming out of it, still able to talk about it. I love that you put this in the writing, and I think you're going to have a lot of readers that this is going to resonate with. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you so much. Yeah, I wrote a book, as you mentioned, Strange but True. And I think because it was called Strange but True, people wanted to know what was true. And so in the back of the paperback, I did a thing of which parts were true and kind of a list of which things were actually taken from life or inspired from life and which were just made up. And I think with all of my books, my sister bought me a t-shirt once that said, careful or you'll end up in my novel.
Yeah.
Which I thought was funny because I'm an eavesdropper and I kind of don't know as I sit down to write what's going to end up in the books, but all of the books have some elements of something. Like I said, that crazy story of overhearing someone say something about me, or the sadder stories of hearing people make fun of me when I was a kid. Like, so you just don't know what's going to end up in the books, and I spend so much time on them, writing, reworking them, reading the chapters out loud, ripping the chapters up, reordering them so they feel like a fun puzzle. Like you mentioned the movie quotes that start each chapter. And the reason I did that is because the primary setting is a drive-in, which is on the cover here, that old abandoned drive-in. And because the narratives seem so separate, I thought I need to give some indication to the reader, sort of my own way of saying, trust me, this is all part of one thing. And so I thought, what if I start each chapter with a quote from a film that once played on the big screen at the drive-in? And then I thought, wouldn't it be fun if the chapters kind of did double duty and acted almost as clues, either tonally or actually in terms of the plot of what's to come in the chapter, and there's everything from more sinister fare, like from The Shining, Red Rum, to Psycho, and then classics like Mildred Pierce at Casablanca, and then kind of forgotten 80s movies. Well, not forgotten by me because I love 80s movies, but like Mannequin or Cannonball Run or kind of sillier movies like that. It was so fun to figure out because I wrote the book first and then I started matching each chapter with a quote to start it, at the top. And that was just a fun kind of structure to give the book. And I've heard from so many readers in book clubs, look, I have my book club t-shirt on from book clubs.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. That they love that element of the movie quotes starting each chapter and then acting as clues. They love that element.
I loved it too because movies are a part of our lives. Here, where we are in Western New York, we had drive-in theaters. We still have one, a couple of them.
Yeah.
I grew up in the trunk being snuck in because we all couldn't
Yeah.
afford to be paid. True story. But these movies, we remember them. We remember lines from them, much like songs from the 70s and 80s. They stick with us. So when you
Yeah.
did that, I just thought that was brilliant that you added that in there.
Thank you.
But you also told us something more, am I wrong? That let's remember these are fantasies, this isn't truth. But how much do we adapt and try to pretend is real? And
Yes.
that leads me to my next question. I love the character Marianne, and she blurts out some wisdom that, of course, you wrote. Who wants anyone to know the truth? That the things that we wanted most from this life, well, they either messed up on their own or they just plain got screwed up for no good reason. Who wants anyone to know we failed? Our lives aren't perfect. We're not happy. We're not successful and fulfilled. I just thought that was so wise of Marianne. She had a very dark view on love and life, but
Yeah.
isn't there some truth in there for all of us? And I wondered what you thought about this for the character Marianne, but as a writer and a person in the real world. When is faking it till you make it not a good thing? When is being positive in every circumstance not a smart thing anymore? What should we admit is going wrong, or what should we be able to say, all right, let's look at the positive, let's look at the bright side? It's tricky.
You two are my kind of readers because you pick up on the really subtle nuances that a writer is going for. So thank you. I appreciate that. So much of the book is about inner beauty versus outer beauty, what we fall in love with. Do we fall in love with the person's looks? Do we fall in love with the personality, the memories we have of them? And then also the allure of social media and texting, and where you're seeing someone's words all the time but not seeing their face as much, and how all these things kind of can confuse what, to go back to the initial question, kind of what we take as love, and so much of the book is about that, the illusion of love. And yeah, so I think each character is just grappling with these issues. And I don't know, when Marianne says that, I had so much fun writing Miriam because she's kind of a good time girl and she likes to have a good time and laugh. She's like, oh, Jer, and teasing him. And then, of course, it gets very dark between them. But it starts out kind of hopeful, and you're like, oh, this sweet reunion between the two. Maybe it'll be okay. But you realize she's had a hard time too with her husband, and things that her life didn't work out the way she wanted. And I guess really none of their lives have fully worked out the way they wanted. But and I think that's true for a lot of people, but everyone on social media, of course, puts the happy, you know, filtered version of their lives up for display, which I understand the instinct. Who wants to put the ugly warts of someone's life up there, but at the same time, that's what the book is about, how the world now, like, so much of it is an illusion as opposed to people presenting their true selves to the world. Does that make sense? I
Yeah,
don't
it
know.
does. Her words were a little wise because they sort of stuck in every reader's heart to make us take a step back. This book really makes you take a step back, examine your own life, your own love, your own world, take an honest look at it. It was very thought provoking. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go dark again over here. I feel
All
like I'm a
right.
dark
That's
person
okay.
today.
That's okay.
Your characters all longed for some kind of connection and belonging. That was very clear. In fact, that need was so strong that some of them manipulated others to get what they needed from them. And I was wondering if you thought, first of all, do we all do that to some extent? And some of, a couple of your characters, maybe Jeremy, maybe Skyla, they were unable to stop themselves from crossing either a legal or a moral or an ethical line to get what they needed from others. And I was wondering, what is it about certain people that they don't have a governor, that they just keep going and pursuing what they need from others?
I don't know because I'm not a psychologist, but you're right. There are people who just, I don't know. Especially when it comes to noir fiction or dark stories, it's like people who go that extra step. But Skyla talks about the headlines on tabloids in the supermarket or things on like Dateline and shows like that, and they're always there. When I go home to visit my mom, she's always got like Dateline watched, on the. I'm like, Mom, stop, turn this off. It's depressing after a while. Someone's always being buried in cement, or I don't know, And so it's out there and it's around us, and these people do these things. And I look at Netflix, all those true crime things that are on there, and I guess I just, as I said before, wanted to get into the psychology and humanity and what's behind people who do this sort of thing. And I guess I don't know, because I can't really speak to other people. Thankfully, you know I, I'm sure all of us, we have moments like, I'd love to like punch that person in the face, but none of us actually do it. We have self-control, but some people don't, or their lives, maybe because their lives haven't worked out the way they wanted, they just figure, screw it. I'm just gonna get what I want at any cost. And particularly in the case of Jeremy and Skyle as well, like I also think feeling loved feels so powerful and special. And if you haven't felt that before, and then you get a taste of it, and you're a person like them, you might be willing to manipulate it to keep feeling that way. It's almost like a drug, it for them.
Absolutely. That's one of the
Mm.
thrills of reading your book, because there's a discomfort you start feeling, and you think in your mind, how far is this person going to go? Oh, they're going there.
Yeah,
How far? Right?
I know. My editor reined me in a few times because it got even crazier. I
Really?
have such a great I have such a great editor at HarperCollins, and she's fantastic. And she worked really hard with me, particularly on the moment when all three of the narratives come together, because that was really challenging to do, because you're laying out these separate storylines and you're hoping the reader stays with you because they seem very, very separate, except for occasionally there'll be a hint where Jeremy says something about his old friend Teddy, or Linnell, and you're like, wait, so they kind of know each other. How are these going to connect? And then when they do, when they finally all three come together, and the movie quote, we turn to the next chapter, and the movie quote is red rum from The Shining. I think then you're like, oh dear God, what's about to go down? But it was a little bit tricky to bring those storylines and all those lives together. And my editor really worked with me on that, because there's a lot of, my books, I certainly don't write formula fiction. And so a lot of it is trial and error and figuring out what works. And sometimes in the middle of the night, I think, what about this? And I get up and work on it. And sometimes it goes the way I envision. And other times I think, oh, this felt better in my head than it does on the page. So, it's part of writing, I guess.
Awesome.
It's the best part of writing because you did give us little clues all throughout, and I love a mystery like that where we have the opportunity. And I did suspect some of these things early on and was waiting for more clues, and that's a lot of fun for the reader. A lot of fun. But
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun to surprise the reader and also give them a little bit of a puzzle piece, I hope. It's not a novel where the reader is spoon fed. This is very much for readers who want kind of an adventure and hopefully an experience where they have to, it's a guessing game. That was my intention.
well, listeners, you're going to want to read this book by John Searles, his latest wonderful novel, Her Last Affair. And you're also going to want to connect with John. You can find him at john-searles.com. He has a newsletter. You can find him on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Am I correct? Yes, all three.
Yes.
And John,
Yes, Instagram is just at John Searles. I'm probably most active on Instagram and Facebook. Somehow Twitter I neglect a little bit,
yeah.
but at John Searles on Instagram and on Facebook. Find me. I would love to hear from people.
There, you're going to have people connecting. And I know that sometimes authors don't like to tell, but can you give us any clue what is on your radar, what you might be thinking about or working on next?
I am about 60 pages into a new book that, for years I was, as you mentioned, the books editor at Cosmopolitan, and a job I loved, loved, loved. I know you're expecting more cleavage and bigger hair probably when I said Cosmo and sex tips floating around my head, right? You're like, what? But yes, I had so much fun at the job, and that's another segment. I'll come on so that we can talk about that. But right now I just dialed back and I'm writing. Just working on this book solely right now, in addition to some freelance essays and things like that. And it's coming very quickly, and it plays on an old kind of classic Gothic novel, and in a very more modern way. But I'm having fun with that. I don't know how to explain. I barely can explain the book I've written and that's published.
Right.
Never mind what I'm in the middle of. So I hope that's not a weird explanation. But I have to tell you, I grew up in a family that I was the first person to go to college. As I said, my dad was a cross country truck driver, and I used to go trucking in the summers with him, and he'd buy me mass market paperbacks and I would read them. He'd buy them in the truck stops for me. And I always dreamed of being a writer. I was a waiter for 12 years, put myself through college, put myself through graduate school, waited tables for a million years. So it never, ever, ever escapes me the feeling of gratitude when two wonderful interviewers like you spend the time reading my book, something I've written, and then ask such thoughtful questions. So really, really, I just want to thank you so much. Really appreciate the time just reading, exploring these characters with me. And sometimes you do an interview and you can tell they really haven't read your book. So it's nice to meet people who ask such thoughtful, smart, intriguing questions. And thanks to your listeners too. I appreciate it.
That's so sweet of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We very carefully vet and read every book. It's our absolute pleasure. And we're thankful to you because you have a gift, which is also your passion, which is also what you love to do. And you pursued it, and you relentlessly, and you did not give up. And as a result, we are all enjoying these wonderful novels. Thank you, John. Thank you for writing. Keep writing.
Thank you.
Can't wait to
I
see the next
appreciate it.
one. Just a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you both. Bye.
And I meant what I said. Thank you to John Searles for his beautiful writing. These characters had so many little words of wisdom and things that made me just stop and say, what? I wanted to bring this up. At one point, the character Skyla looks at a little girl, and instead of looking and thinking, oh, what a cute little girl, she looks at the life that child may have ahead. And looking at the cup half empty, she says, I give myself the pleasure of this moment, to consider all the many dangers out there in the world waiting for this little girl. A host of horrifying diseases, the slim but possible chance of a plane crash, the risk of a grisly car crash, the chance of choking on a wedge of grapefruit, getting struck by a stray bullet. At first, it's comical and you want to laugh a little, but then I thought, no, there's more to this, because this is life for all of us. We do try to focus on the positive. We have to focus on the positive. But if we looked at what trouble could befall us on a daily basis or years ahead, we could drive ourselves crazy.
Yeah, I think this book kind of challenged you to think about hope. You know, where is your hope found? What is it that you hope in? And again, it doesn't give you any answers, but it certainly provokes you to think along those lines. And also, you can look at each of these characters, because where they place their hope, you know, in a marriage or in a memory of something that could have been, these are things that may not be lasting in terms of hope. So I thought it was really thought-provoking on many levels. And, you know, the quote you just read, you could almost think in your mind, I don't even want to get out of bed in the morning, because you could have anxiety about everything that could befall you. But we can't live like that, right? We have to live in terms of, let's take on what comes our way. Let's not worry about what we don't have in front of us. And again, that way of thinking could offer some hope to people.
Yes, that's a good way to look at it, that this ability that you have to cope and you have to be filled with hope. And then I could take it on the flip side and say, as John said, a lot of these people were looking for something, and they went back to their past, to old relationships, but they were naively putting their hope that that was going to be their answer, that that was going to save them, that that was going to be rekindled and be something like, for instance, that they see in the movies.
Yeah.
And it led to a lot of disappointment sometimes, can't give any spoilers, led to some danger sometimes. So that's another twist on something to take away with life. Let's be realistic. Let's be honest with ourselves. Let's be realistic, but not to the point where we're going to be negative and not have any hope in anything. It was a really good balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that was on my radar with this book also is, what stops us from crossing the line morally or ethically, or even legally? Mm-hmm. And, you know, for some people, it's, I care about what others think of me. You know, for other people, it's, I don't want negative consequences that could come in my life if I cross the line, going to prison, for example. And maybe for other people, it's the idea that in the afterlife there is, you know, some kind of accountability. They believe in a God, and that's what keeps them in check. And I was thinking about that because I think we all have to evaluate, what is it that keeps you in check from crossing that line? Because here, these characters really struggled with that, because a few of them did step over that line, and what stopped them? Mm-hmm. Nothing.
That's a good point. For me, pretty much it's the law. I'd like to stay out of jail as much as possible. I'm a rule follower anyway, but I think that's what we love about fiction, maybe, because the things that we can't do and wouldn't even think of doing, mm-hmm. can't get away with, no, we shouldn't do, we can do through these characters in these books, like John's book, that takes crazy risks and pursues insane fantasies and gets in all murky waters and trying to swim out, and we can sit back and watch it and enjoy it, sort of live through it a little bit.
Yeah, a little cathartic, as you pointed out.
Yes, I love that you brought that up. There were so many good topics, and it was just a pleasure talking to John Searles today. We love his writing. We love his books. See the film. You heard us talk about the film. Just fantastic. Want to give a shout out to our incredibly talented sound engineer. You know him by now. It's a household name. The Mr. Mark Carey, always unassuming in a t-shirt and doesn't look it, but believe me, this is the brains right here about what goes on a daily basis at this place. Thank you, Mark.
Hope you guys enjoyed the show today, and we'll see you again next week.
Can't wait to get into these next books that we have for our fall lineup. We are booked months ahead, and so very grateful and excited about what we're going to be bringing to you. We have Ellen Marie Wiseman, The Lost Girls of Willowbrook, Lori Lico Albanese and Hester, Meg Waite Clayton, the paperback copy of The Postmistress of Paris is out, Jamie Ford, The Many Daughters of Afong Moy, William Kent Kruger, Fox Creek, and Shelby Van Pelt, Remarkably Bright Creatures.
In the meantime, listeners, stay on the radar with Bookstorm by visiting our website at bookstormpodcast.com. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. If you'd like to see us in person, or better yet, one of our amazing authors, you can find us on our podcast, which is on YouTube. Just search Bookstorm and Podcast, and we should come right up. Until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.